Alright, so I'm gonna just start. This is gonna be a top to bottom map review. Hopefully you get through as many of them as possible. It's a long list, but many of them, like we're not doing Hanunanuamora Winter, obviously. We're not doing Paris or Volskaya Industries. So we'll get through as many as we can, and I'll hopefully be able to upload them individually for you. So we're gonna start with Hanunanuamora. This is a map that we haven't really set a strategy for or played in a way that has been kind of like, constructive. I think you guys have played it. You guys have gotten a feel for it with one another, but we want to kind of get into the strategies a little bit more for playing Hanunanuamora in a team-based setting, and the optimal way and where your teammates should be, etc., etc. So we're going to kind of just go through the various different parts of first point defense. I'm going to talk through defense first, offense second, because I think, again, offense is a little bit easier for you guys to kind of get into. Defense is going to be a little bit complicated, a little bit more strategical. You guys seem to have most of the bare bone concepts of attacking. It's just that matter of pushing through chokes that really trips you up. Okay, so how am I gonna? I need epic pen. Stop it. Go away, you. No, I need epic pen. There we go. All right, we figured it out. Okay, so this is going to become a theme over the course of many different games, but I really want you guys to make sure that you're identifying and taking control of vital high grounds. So there's going to be a lot of spaces like this where you see these high grounds that are surrounding a singular pit area, and we can actually use this to our advantage to try to corral enemies. So the yellow is going to be used to indicate the high ground and stuff like this. Pink for now will be used to indicate the choke points, and then blue, I guess, will be what I draw with just straight out. So you may see people hopping in and out if you're watching this recorded, and I don't know who's gonna join and when, but it's 4:13, so I'm gonna try to get through as many as possible within the hour 45 minutes we have before getting to scrims. Okay, so this area up here is going to be, that choke point up there is going to be the part that most ranked players are going to try to hold. And this is going to be very good for brawl type compositions to hold. Because what it's going to do is it's going to allow for you to group up the enemies. And if you're playing something like a May Reaper or Sim or who's another Junkrat, if you want to play Junkrat and splash a bunch of damage around, this is going to be great for those types of heroes. But it's not going to be good for heroes that don't excel in clumped up ball type compositions. So Tracer, Widow, Genji, no, Pharah is good against clusters. Damn, I should have had the hero list open so that I could do this a little bit smoother, because I always forget some of the heroes. Give me 1 second. Okay, so it's not going to be good for, Doomfist, okay. It's not going to be great for Hanzo. Hanzo's a spam, but he still wants to be able to pick off targets. It's not going to be great for Soldier. It's not going to be too good for Sombra if they're all clumped up together like that. Not too great for Torbjorn because they're gonna block his damage types with their shielding and stuff like that. So that's really just in terms of our DPS. The people who are similar, Zenyatta, Ana, Baptiste, they don't really like when people are super clustered together, because although in theory it makes them easier to hit, it can sometimes make it a little bit more annoying to get proper sight lines onto them, especially for, like, let's say a Widowmaker. If you're holding them in choke, the only real sight line that a Widowmaker has is kind of this narrow angle right here. And that's not really enough of a sight line for your Widowmaker to have proper threat onto the enemy. So if we're playing with characters who want to have better sight lines, flank angles onto the enemies, we actually want to let the enemies into the courtyard. And what we're going to do in these situations is we're going to hold the high grounds around so that at any point we can make the rotations that we want to get to point, and also just contest them as they come through. The idea is that we want them to be able to walk through a minefield to get to point, and take as much damage as they do in transition, while we're kind of sitting pretty wherever we want, where they can't get to us too easily. So this is really going to be like a, oh hey Complex, this is going to be more of a dive type thing. I'm recording, so I'm like starting, hold on, let me share my screen on Discord because I didn't. Screen 1, 60 FPS. Okay. So I'm just kind of talking about Hanunanuamora A defense first. So these yellow are the high grounds, this pink is the choke. So I was just talking about how when people are at choke, it's good for certain types of heroes, but not every type of hero. So anybody who wants extra flank angles, or like a Widow who might want a wider line of sight onto the enemies, it's not really favorable for them to have for the enemies to be like stuffed into a choke, because then the Widow has a really limited line of sight. Let's say if you're playing a Tracer, the Tracer has very few ways of getting into the enemy backline and putting pressure on them, and she's not really shield break, so she can't do anything from the front up. So this really works with a dive type of composition or a bunker type of composition, and we've been slowly moving into a lot more dive. I actually think I don't know if you were watching the video that I had put, I think it was the Hanunanuamora video or something like that, but Complex, I think that your Winston is actually pretty far ahead of your Reinhardt, just in terms of kind of comfort and your understanding of moment to moment situation, what you should be doing. So I feel like we might start to lean into more of a dive type play style where we're running Monkey more often than we are running Reinhardt. But the two defenses are going to come down to this, right? You're either going to run a Rein and you're going to hold at choke, or you're going to run a Monkey and you're going to hold the high ground. Now, high ground rules are always going to be the same. You don't want to drop until the very last moment if you don't have to. You want to try to only drop when you have an opportunity. You want to play for the clock, not play for just, you know, that first 2 ticks or whatever. And you want to be able to always return to the high ground readily, as long as you have movement cooldowns. Like, you want to try to manage yourself so that your movement cooldowns are always ready. So that means don't use movement cooldowns to drop down onto people or get off of the high ground. Use movement cooldowns only to get back onto the high ground. Or if you have a hero-specific thing, like Genji's dash reset, where he can dash to kill a target and then still have his movement to get back to the high ground, because he'll still have wall climb and all of his crazy tech. So, you know, generally you're going to want to be playing from this. This is going to be your right side high ground the most. The left side high ground is a little bit more limiting, because the line of sight that you get doesn't open up until they're in this section of the courtyard, which makes it a little bit harder for you to actually work from. But this high ground isn't completely useless, because it does offer this window, which will move around in a little bit, but it does offer this window here that gives line of sight to the point. But it's a very defensive positioning that doesn't really optimize most snipers or long-range characters that would want to be playing from those sight lines. So generally, that left side high ground is going to be a little bit less useful to you as defenders. Not ignorable, but a little bit less useful. You're probably only going to want to contest it if the attackers are using it, but you won't actively need it to take it early. This right side one is going to just be the best, because it gives you the biggest line of sight, access to a mega, and then you can rotate around coast to be able to contest point from this side. Now, this gets into the really, really tricky part of Hanunanuamora, I think, overall, that a lot of people tend to get a little bit wonky, is contesting this point. There's 2 ways to really do it, from the left side and from the right side. And while that sounds really straightforward, there's a lot of times where people don't understand what it means to contest from the left side and from the right side. So I'm going to talk about from this this left side over here to start, and try to burn through this as quickly as I fucking can. Can I get in the window? Jesus Christ. Okay, so when you're playing from this left side, generally speaking, your supports are going to be playing in one of these 2 angles, which is going to be this top window up here, or this doorway down here, which means this is their line of sight. So if you're playing a tank or a DPS or something like that, and you're deciding to hold defensively on this left-hand side, understand that going past this gong here, your supports can't see you. Going behind these walls here like this, your supports have very limited line of sight on you, and anything that becomes too aggressive past these ranges becomes difficult. Like, you're on your own for sustain, because if we're playing something like an Ana, which we're usually playing an Ana Mercy, especially this semester with our support lineup, your Ana does not need to sacrifice herself to push into the line of sights that you want her to be able to see, because it is way too dangerous. There's going to be times where, you know, maybe Tat can push over here a little bit if you decide to go to the left, but you cannot depend on that. And it's largely going to be up to his moment-to-moment decision-making to figure out, should I save this person's dumbass mistake, or should I just let them perish? So when we're holding left side, it's really going to come down to, you know, like if we drop down and we're backing to point, like it's going to be the support's call, give or take, which side they're holding and which side the tanks play from. Because on a map like Hanunanuamora, more often than not, it's easy for the tanks to traverse this area, than it is for the supports, because the supports, the other option for them is, let's say if you were playing this high ground, is to take this rotation where they walk through this mega area and play from this back coast area right here where they have access to a mini, they have walls that can break line of sight and such, and it gives you a very similar effect where, you know, line of sight is broken if you go past the bell too much, or if you break hard to the left or to the right, they can't really see you too well. They may be able, like I said, they can peek over here, maybe a little bit peek over here, similar to on the other side, but it's going to put them, the further forward they go, it's going to put them at a disadvantage more and more so, right? So the reason it's harder for them to cross one side or the other is because they're so far from their two positions. Their two positions are literally on extended sets of opposite side of the point, right? Meanwhile, the tank's holding position is a much smaller rotation just around the bell. So, you know, this connection here is going to be really important between the tanks and the support so that we can sustain contest on point and make sure that we're actively kind of like just not feeding, essentially. DPS is going to be a little bit more free flow, a little bit dependent on who you're playing. You know, McCree, Reaper, you're going to want to be playing either a little bit closer to the sports or a little bit closer to the tank, depending on if you're peeling or if you're trying to push down the enemy tanks. If you're playing like a Widowmaker, you might want to just rotate down mid and play from this sight line for a little bit, or up here. Like, you could go just far away from the fight and just shoot down into the fight as Widowmaker. Hanunanuamora is a really good Widowmaker map because of things like that, because you basically can just split away from your team and shoot from really far away. If you're playing a Genji, you know, you're going to be jumping around doing Genji things, etc., etc. I'm not going to continue to elaborate on DPS, but for tanks and supports, that positioning is going to be really important on first. So let's do a time check right now. Ooh, the speed run is still too slow. Okay, so attack. All right, when we attack into this, I would like us to go to this right side. I would like this to just be our rotation for now. So if we want to use this Symmetra, we can. Like, we can TP to the left side or TP straight to point if we want to. But I think our default strategy should be to shield the team into this side over here. Now, this can be done in one of two ways. I say shield the team, right? But this can be done with a Diva, just defense matrixing the team. So Diva would stand about here. I'm sure we should be cool with this, but Diva should stand about here. The team's gonna begin walking. The Diva's gonna defense matrix them as they walk through. Only downside is if they have a Zarya or a Symmetra, defense matrix doesn't stop those things, right? If we don't want to run a Diva or something like that, you know, we shield them with a Reinhardt, and then we go from this mini area over here. I don't really have a title for this, but we would go up the stairs and make this long rotation, also shielding across the bridge to try to gain control of this left side high ground. Well, it'd be right side on attack, but it's left side for defenders. But essentially what this is going to do is it's going to give us a staging ground for an attack that comes from an area where we can have structure, similar to how we would on our defense. The supports would play from those same sight lines, and they'd have very similar defensive options, and it would take away the defender's advantage that the defenders are given by being able to set in a good positioning, by making a very, like, it's going to be a slow rotation, it's going to be a long rotation, but it's going to be one that gives you an equal fight, if not an advantage. Now, the main question comes to if they're holding choke. If they are holding choke, you cannot hesitate as a team. It is well advised that you just run Rein, Zarya, Lucio, Moira if they're holding choke, because what you should essentially do is use your cooldowns in a respectable pattern to try to burst down the people who are closest to this entryway and try to make it so that, you know, they have minimal opportunities to shoot you back. So you want to make this seamless, you want to make it smooth. What's going on, Frosty? So you want that speed boost to come in so that you can minimize, because the poke damage for Reinhardt, it's going to start around here, which means you want to close this distance very quickly. And you don't want to complex. This is what I'm talking about in terms of wiggling, how it could be bad. You don't want to kind of like wiggle your way there. We want the straight line walk straight at them, straight swinging with the bubble on you, and then as soon as the bubble goes away, let Genetic get in front of you, whether you have to step in one direction, this direction over here, if you have to kind of walk back a little bit, whatever it happens to be. Just make sure that you get the value out of both those bubbles. And then you continue to be aggressive by either shielding your team forward, because you're likely to have a Reaper or Symmetra or something similar to that with you, or by swinging forward if the enemy Reinhardt or if the enemy team is showing that they don't have as much damage as you do. Now that point is going to be a really important distinction to your complex as Reinhardt, because it's going to make the difference between your team winning the fight and losing the fight. The first part is not too hard, right? It's going to be a little bit difficult, maybe timing it right and getting the bubbles on you and stuff like that, timing the speed. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it is, it goes wrong sometimes. It has its faults. But the important part is going to be, as a Reinhardt, recognizing, on my way here, how fast did that bubble break, and how much damage did my shield take? Because that is the only gauge of information you will have as to how much damage the enemy team can do to you, and that is the determinant on whether or not you should drop your shield or not. Because if by the time you get to this point, by the time you get to choke, even with speed boost, if you've dropped 500 health, that means they can drop you 500 health in the second it takes you to drop your shield, in which case it is better to just shield and continue to walk forward so that your team can replicate similar damage without you instantly feeding, and once your shield is broken, you can hope that bubbles are back online, or you can just continue swinging and pray for your life. Your supports will have to, do their best at that point, and you'll just try to maximize damage from there. If that doesn't wind up working, that means they're probably running something where you have to focus a certain target down, like a Bastion or Symmetra, because there are very few heroes that can do such egregious damage that, Moira shouldn't be able to heal you through it. Note this rock as a station to kind of checkpoint yourself at midway through. You can use it for partial cover, and then continue on to point where you would hold, like people can stop back here, like your Annas and your Widows might kind of like stop once you clear this choke area and just heal you from here. So just mine this sight line, and DPS will again do the same thing that they always do, dependent on their hero. So gathering high ground, taking flank routes, sticking on your hip, complex if they're a Reinhardt. And I'm talking about this from Complex's point of view because really this choke does come down to the tank's ability to make space for the DPS, because the DPS will have certain things they can do to enable movement through chokes, but pushes through chokes almost exclusively come down to the tanks and supports ability to use their abilities. Like it's really ridiculous, I think, sometimes how exclusive this is to just being a tanking responsibility. But nonetheless, it is. So that's going to be first point, attacking and defending. Second point should be a little bit quicker. We're going to go right side, traditional, take this high ground. Similar, if they're holding up this high ground, it's going to be very similar to how we pushed through the first choke. Speed boost, double bubbles, swinging, gauging your timing, making sure that, you're being aware of how much damage they're doing and shielding or swinging appropriately. The idea is that we want to claim this high ground so that we can not have people shooting down on us, but also so that we can maybe have somebody shooting down on them. So this will be dependent on our composition, because if we're playing something like a Reaper McCree, or a Reaper Mei, we don't want anybody on the high ground except maybe our Ana. But Reaper Mei, neither of them really want to be utilizing high ground, so you guys are going to just drop the point with the rest of the team and kind of hold that. But we definitely want to try to keep this clear because, alright, so assuming we're always going to be playing an Ana, or assuming that, we are playing some sort of Mercy Ana combination maybe, our Ana will want to try to stay up here because it allows her to break line of sight, allows her to protect herself, and all you have to do is essentially stop the enemy team from walking up the stairs, which as a tank you should be kind of playing from here or from here once you clear point, and that should kind of like, you can see if they're going to walk upstairs and then you could push it. DPS, you should probably be mindful of these things, these pillars right here, because these lantern pillars are going to be really important for you staying alive when your supports can't keep you alive. And I mean, similarly for tanks, but tanks you have to like clear space and make the point a little bit more open, so be just aware that you can't just sit all the way back even if you're getting pressured. You have to try to make space so that you can give your team opportunities. But DPS, be aware of this so that you can kind of like, if you're playing the appropriate healers, where like, let's say for a second you're like, Mei, I'm just going to wait 3 seconds and kind of poke until I have my ice block on off cooldown, and then I'm going to be aggressive, right? Or similar with Reaper, I'm going to chill back here and wait till my Wraith is off cooldown, and then I'm going to be aggressive. But clearing this high ground is going to be super duper important to kind of like holding the point as a whole, just because this whole high ground is largely inaccessible to the attackers because of how open it is. And this top right high ground is going to be the only high ground as attackers that you can get and continue to claim. Plus these other high grounds are just much harder to access most times. Like this one is like the most exclusive high ground in any of the maps, excluding maybe things like this, which almost don't really count as high grounds because they're in such particular areas. Okay, so that's attacking for second point. Defending is going to be very similar. We want to hold this this top left high ground. It's going to be top left. We can kind of look ahead above and see that it's a similar pit type style to the first point, where we have, you know, the 3 different high grounds to the left, top, and right that look down at the point. So we can use this to our advantage in chaotic fights to make sure that if we're stalling point, you know, we want as many of our DPS and supports to be playing from these kind of advantaged positions while our tanks stall out, so that we can deal damage from safe areas, so that our supports can just focus on healing the tanks can sustain longer on point, so the DPS have more time to get picks. It's a perpetual motion cycle, so, you know, it really does come down to, you know, if you feel like you can't do your job, you still gotta try, because it kind of clicks something for another person, which clicks something for another person, which makes your job even easier, right? So we just really want to be aware of these high grounds overall on Hanamura, and that's going to be the biggest thing. So yeah, holding this top left is going to be pretty important. You can drop down here to try to get some cheeky flank damage in when they start pushing and stuff like that. Just be aware that you know, it becomes easier for them to aggress in you. But if you want to hold like a Widow here, like if you want to split off or have a Hanzo with a Mercy Pocket over here and have 4 people up top, like we can have Shadow and Luna over here, just kind of like poking as people come through. And then once they come across this top left side, you could just poke them in their back as they pass by, and it'll probably give a lot of value overall. Things to be aware of is just this coast side. This coast side is not a traditional attack route because this disconnect here, most heroes can't actually make this jump, but a Symmetra teleporter makes it possible for everybody. So just try to be aware of the fact that they can push this way. There's going to be a lot of teams that use the sim strategy on this point, which is largely why you don't want to hold choke on this point anymore, and you do generally want to hold the outside high grounds, because the sim TP is going to basically skip the choke point. It's like a shortcut where you just get past this whole section over here. So if they do that, just mind your rotations. Mind where your supports communicate that they want to go, whether it's coast or spawn side, or you know, like just mind how you're aggressing into the point, not using too many cooldowns to get there, trying to hold as many resources as possible so that you can get actual value with them later on, or escape to try to sustain and draw out the clock as defenders. So kind of a brief overview of Hanamura. I think that there's a lot of things you can actually learn, more things you can learn about the map just in small particularities, but I want to try to rush through as many maps as possible. So I'm going to stop this recording, I'm going to start another one, and yeah.